French President Emmanuel Macron is not receiving enough backlash, well, at least diplomatic backlash from African countries for thinking African countries owe him anything. Whether him or the French government, whether today or in the past, it doesn't matter. But for ever thinking that Africans owe him anything, I do think that he should be receiving a lot more hits than he's currently receiving, if at all he did receive any. And if you're wondering why I would take such a strong stance, recently at a meeting that Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, had with French diplomats posted across the world, he said this.
Nous avions une relation sécuritaire. Elle était de deux natures en vérité. Il y a une partie, c'était notre engagement contre le terrorisme depuis 2013. On avait raison. Je crois qu'on a oublié de nous dire merci. C'est pas grave, ça viendra avec le temps. L'ingratitude, je suis bien placé pour le savoir, c'est une maladie non transmissible à l'homme. Mais je le dis pour tous les gouvernants africains qui n'ont pas eu le courage vis-à-vis de leurs opinions publiques de le porter, aucun d'entre eux ne serait aujourd'hui avec un pays souverain si l'armée française ne s'était pas déployée dans cette région. Et j'ai une pensée émue pour nos soldats qui, parfois, ont donné leur vie et pendant des années se sont battus. Nous avons bien fait. On est parti parce qu'il y a eu des coups d'État, parce qu'on était là à la demande d'États souverains qui avaient demandé à la France de venir. À partir du moment où il y a eu des coups d'État, où les gens ont dit « notre priorité, c'est plus la lutte contre le terrorisme, c'est ceci ou cela, qu'importe », la France n'y avait plus sa place, parce que nous ne sommes pas les supplétifs de putschistes. Donc on est parti.
This is not the first time that Emmanuel Macron has come under fire for his big gaffe on the continent. Back in 2017, he was meeting with young Burkinabés. At the time, President Kabore was in power, and he had told them that it was not the job of the French government to provide them with electricity, and instead they should turn to their government and hold them responsible. While they were having the conference, the president stepped out, that's the president of Burkina Faso at the time, stepped out to use the bathroom, and then he jokingly said, well, see, he's going to fix the AC. And that really angered a lot of people, and rightly so, because you just don't chip in the president of a country right in front of his constituents. It just doesn't make any sense. Anyway, so that's some background for just how disrespectful Emmanuel Macron can get when he's discussing Africans or even relating with African issues. Now, moving on to this recent blunder, let's break it down one after the other. You might say that, well, Emmanuel Macron is correct. Many African countries would not have had their sovereignty today if the French army had not been deployed in the region. Let's take that argument and break it down. The one thing you should understand here is that the French government are not doing it out of an abundance of generosity. It's not all altruistic. They have some vested interests here on the continent, whether they're trying to protect their countries or they're trying to protect the minerals that they exploit from African countries all the way to Paris or anywhere in the world where they have to sell them. They are not doing it because they love Africans or they feel like they owe us any debts for whatever it is that we've done for them. They're doing it because they get paid. It is completely transactional. Completely. And all of these transactions in many cases are written into a bilateral agreement that more often than not favors the French more than the African countries that they enter into these bilateral agreements with. And you know, when you also think of the way in which French army has been deployed on the continent, in many cases they've been used to oppress the African people. And here's an example of that happening. Back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, French politicians dispatched troops to protect a variety of Chadian dictators. In fact, in 1986, France launched Operation Epervier to protect the regime of Hissène Habré against the advance of Libyan forces and Libyan-backed rebel. That man, Habré, was convicted of crimes against humanity back in 2016. So that's not exactly the type of person you want to brag about protecting now, is it? If you also say that all the French did was protect African countries from the spread of jihadists and insurgents that were ravaging a better part of the Sahel in the last decade or so, well, here's a counter thought, not from me, but from many researchers on the continent. In February 2019, A series of French airstrikes in Chad took out a column of around 50 pickup trucks carrying rebels from Union de Force de la Résistance, a group opposed to then President of Chad, Idriss Déby. Although a comparatively minor incident, this is sort of reflective of a broader pattern to France's lingering involvement in African affairs. What they are trying to say is, if the aim of the French in Africa was to stop the spread of jihadists and, terrorists and other form of insurgents growing in the continent, why then did its forces intervene to protect its leader from a domestic political issue? Again, another evidence that France's involvement in Africa is not always about politics, or it's not always about protecting them from, jihadists or trying to keep the country safe. Sometimes they meddle into local African politics, and that's not ideal. Anyway, look, my name is Chika, and I love to talk about African issues on this platform. So if you're big on African affairs, or you're just enjoying the conversation so far, please do me a favor, like, share, subscribe to this channel, and tell more people about it. If you've got a counter opinion to anything that I've said so far, please drop it in the comment section, and we can have a full conversation when I get to see it. Now let's get back to these conversations, because there are more. You see, if you also say that France supports its African territories economically, I'm sure that by now we both know that it's not completely true. I mean, the existence of the CFA that is pegged to the old French CFA is still largely used in 14 of their territories today, and there is no hope that they will change it anytime soon. Even though on paper, they're at liberty to do so, many countries haven't and probably won't be doing that. And, let me tell you something interesting. Did you know that back in the 60s, in 1960, during the Guinean independence struggle, they had revolted against the French? And do you know what the Paris government did? Well, it came up with a plan that would have flooded the country with fake Guinean currencies, because they were trying to move away from the French CFA to their own currency, because they wanted to do away with colonization. And there was a plan by the French government to flood the country with its own currencies, fake currencies at that. This is widely known as Operation Persil, very much similar to the Nazi Operation Bernhard. The Nazis, they had this blueprint. So when France has a history of drawing from the Nazi playbook for its operations or relationship with Africa, why should we say thank you to them? Nobody tells the Jews to thank the Germans for anything, even though Germany still pays some form of restitution for the Holocaust till this very day. I dare any world leader to ask the Jews to say thank you to Germany. Go on and see what happens to your political career then. So if you don't do that with the Jews, why do you think it's okay to say that about Africans? Why is it okay to say that your former territories that you've exploited for decades owe you anything? Why do you think we owe you a simple thank you in the first place?